Hey guys, welcome to book review number 39. It's either 38 or 39, I forget. So, pardon me if I can't remember. But Postcards from Tomorrow Square, Reports from China by James Fallows. Now, what this book is obviously it's about China, but there are a series of articles written for the Atlantic, which is a major newspaper, not really a newspaper, but major news magazine within the United States. They kind of do, I think they're a little bit leftist, but they generally just do kind of like long piece articles that come out once a month. And this is a collection of those articles that this James Fallows did while he was in China. So it's separated into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's separated into 12 different stories, so I'm just going to give a very quick rundown of each story. Postcards from Tomorrow Square, that just is sort of, as well as being the title of the book, that's the first article. That's just sort of about why James Fallows came to China and sort of kind of his personal reflections, as well as just an outlier of where the state is. I think it also gives some cautions about China, specifically what to watch out for, some misunderstandings about China, specifically in how centralized the power is, or how monolithic the power is. One of the things James mentioned in the article was how different how China could express vast powers in certain circumstances or under certain conditions, but at the same time was a country that could barely feed its own people, or it can feed its own people, but can't really lift its own people out of poverty, and just has all these social issues. So it's not this monolith that a lot of people think that it is. Article 2 was Mr. Zhang Builds His Own Dream, which is about a air conditioning and heating tycoon, primarily air conditioning, that arose in China. And actually I had some personal interest because my grandpa was he was the head manager at a air conditioning plant here in Missouri in the United States. So that's pretty interesting. And what it really focused on was sort of how this factory was almost kind of like a cult-like environment, but not in a in a negative way in a sense, but just in the sense that Mr. Zhang controlled all the environment for his employees, where they lived, what they ate, what they were paid, their workout regimen, their family life. It wasn't really controlled, but it was kind of set up for them. That being said, most people in these factories worked 14, 15-hour days, and didn't get paid very much. Now, it did say that they got paid more than the average wage, maybe like 20% more, but that's still quite a bit less than obviously what we make in the United States. But that's a whole other issue, and really it's unfeasible to pay those employees that amount. So it was really kind of benevolent of Mr. Zhang to pay his workers slightly more. He also mentioned that unlike the rest of the factory areas, this factory is set apart kind of in the interior of China compared to the coastal China where the majority of factories are, like Shanghai, Guangdong, what's that one province? Fujian, those areas. This is kind of in the interior, I think in Hunan province. But one of the things he mentioned is, unlike a lot of those other factories, this factory was very meticulous in keeping the details up to date, making sure there just wasn't junk piled all over the place, keeping the factory in pristine condition, just the general upkeep of the factory. The third article was When in China, which was a reality show based on The Apprentice in the United States with Donald Trump. Now, if you know anything about The Apprentice, it's about people competing for a job position. But in the bizarro new, though it's still technically communist, China, they weren't. It was a business-related contest between various individuals. But instead of just merely competing for a job, essentially what they were competing for was venture capital money for whoever had the best business idea. And it talked about the 2 or 3 different kind of characters. One was a pregnant mother. The other one was sort of an uneducated but very charismatic rural man who all fiercely competed. I think another one was a sort of kind of high-end business guy that had gone to Stanford in the United States or something like that, who fiercely competed to get this money, and kind of how it grasped the nation. It really was sort of on the scale of an Apprentice in terms of how popular it was for the country, maybe even more so. I think it was the #1 rated show in all of China during its initial run. So the next one is China Makes, the World Takes, which this one was really good. It was about an Irish entrepreneur in Shenzhen, which is right across the river from Hong Kong. Which, anything about Shenzhen, it was the first special economic zone of China where they set up all the new factories in China in the 80s, and the evolution of that since then, the huge, massive evolution. And where you see, made in China now and stuff. Just a little bit more background about Shenzhen. In the 80s, when it became a special administrative region, I think the population was like 40,000. And in the 25 years or so since that came into fruition, this special economic zone, this area that the government was going to give special concessions to in order to promote business, Shenzhen has become a city with a population of about 11 million people, so about the size of like Los Angeles or something, which is just insane. But anyway, it's about a guy that what he does is most companies that make stuff in China don't make it directly. They contract out to factory zones within mainland China, at least if they're looking to produce in mainland China. And what this guy is, and he's a multi-millionaire, like, I don't know, 100 times over, is he coordinates all of the, he's essentially the middleman between the production line and the like Apple or Dell or all of the actual companies. And it would seem like a middleman doesn't do much, but it takes like a textbook knowledge of kind of the intricacies of the way factory life works in the Guangdong, Sichuan region in order to get stuff done. It's very mercurial. I can't even say it. Mercurial in the word I'm looking for. Mercurial in how things work. Now on the surface, you go in, you order factory, you'll probably get it done. But in order to kind of maintain long-term business relations and just really get everything done right and make sure that there aren't any snafus, which tend to happen with Chinese-made products, you really got to have an insider guy. I think his name was like Liam Casey. He was from Ireland. But yeah, like I said, he runs this huge company that does all this middleman stuff. And I mean, it doesn't just talk about that guy. It also talks about kind of the mass migration movement of immigrants from the poor interior regions of the country out to the mainland, or out to the factories. That was one of my favorites of the entire thing. China Makes, the World Takes. The fifth article was Macau's Big Gamble. Now Macau is a special administrative region, and I think I said Sichuan was a special administrative region. It's actually a special economic zone, which is different, which means essentially that the politics are the same, but more or less. But the government essentially gives concessions to business. But Macau is not a special economic zone, but a special administrative region, a SAR, which means that they have their own currency, government, it's just like Hong Kong. Everything's separated from the mainland China to the point that they're almost an independent country, except for military and diplomatic matters. Like they have their own currency and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean that one was really good. They kind of talked about how Macau has kind of become the Las Vegas of the East. And what I found most interesting was that a practice started in like I think the 70s or something when Macau was just starting to gain some steam as a huge gambling center. Was that there was a lot of illicit gambling, and rather than try to attack it with like a police presence or crack down on it, Stanley Ho, who was and still is a huge casino proprietor, decided to essentially co-opt these illegal gambling people and brought them into their casino. And what he did is he said, okay, we'll have our direct casino gambling, on the floor or whatever, but these people can rent rooms within our facilities and essentially operate their own gambling outfits. And that's actually where about 40% of the gambling goes on in Macau. Now, as you can imagine, this creates a recipe for disaster in terms of corruption, money laundering, all that kind of stuff. And what the current tension is now that Macau is starting to bring in more Las Vegas style casinos, Stanley Ho lost his monopoly. He had a monopoly on casino gambling in, I think, 2001 or something. So once he lost his monopoly, like the Sands, the Venetian, Caesars, the Wynn, they decided to come in. And so now the real tension is between the quote unquote high standards, Las Vegas is what it is, of these Las Vegas gaming companies that at least nowadays, now not back in the day, but nowadays are very strict about what can go on versus the sort of old tradition of the kind of shoot from the hip gambling that went on in Macau, in the last 30 or 40 years. Okay, and then the next one is the 1.4 trillion, I think this is number 6, the $1.4 trillion question, which is about the debt in China and United States, specifically United States debt towards China, and how China is holding an insane amount of US dollars. Now, I knew that this had happened, and I knew that it was largely driven by a trade imbalance, a lot more products coming out of China to the United States than in the reverse direction. And I also knew that this was caused partially because China keeps down its currency levels by directly pegging them to the dollar. So what that essentially means is if you float a currency-free market, an item in country A and an item in country B will eventually even out in terms of their trade value, because people will just trade over time. But when a government steps in and sets a specific trade value for their currency, that means they can go higher, they can go lower, and China has chosen to go lower, with the direct consequence being the exportation of large amounts of goods to the United States, thus bringing in cash from the United States, which China holds. I knew all that, but what I found interesting and really kind of emphasizes the point of how much currency China holds is that when a Chinese company, I said that often Dell and Apple and all these people don't make their products directly. They actually contract them out to factories in China. So when a Chinese company, not like Apple and them, but like the actual makers, the production line, receive money from an American company to make a product, they can't hold that currency in reserve in American dollars. It's illegal in China. They have to immediately trade them over to the communist government for whatever the pegs level is. So no company in China can hold US dollars, which essentially what happens is China prints out money, or just whatever way the government gets money, and exchanges it prints out yuan, prints out their own money, obviously, and exchanges it for these dollars, and that's every single dollar that comes into the country to a Chinese-based company, which, I mean, that's just insane. Which is why they have these huge currency reserves. The next one was the connection has been reset. This is about the vast internet boom that is going on in, I don't know. I don't think it is. I think that's the world has been wired. I'm going to have to actually look this up. 169. I should have done all this research ahead of time, but let's see. No, this is about, oh, you know what this is there's two of them about the internet. This first one is about the firewalls that happen within China. You know, China is known as a police state, a state that is highly censored. And the truth is kind of somewhere in between. They do censor subjective material, but what it really isn't meant to be, let's say you're metaphorically driving a car, is not to be a wall, but really to be a roadblock to the point where not governmentally, but sociologically, people are discouraged from visiting sensitive sites to the point where they'll just visit the Chinese-sponsored site, which will obviously give the Chinese version of the story. A good example of this obviously being like Tiananmen Square, which is the huge democratic protest that happened in 1989. So you can still look up technically stuff on Tiananmen Square within China on certain computers. Now some of it will be blocked directly, like the Wikipedia page will be blocked directly. But China isn't looking to stop everything about Tiananmen Square going into China. What they're looking to do is create just enough of a hassle that a average Chinese consumer would, without really thinking about it, would just kind of click on the search engine that goes to the more politically appropriate for Chinese standards site about such sensitive political issues. And I found this interesting. You know, some of the other things he mentioned in here had to do with like the Olympics, and obviously with the Olympics there are a lot of journalists, and journalists are very sensitive to having their material blocked and having their not necessarily stuff they write, though that's obviously important, but specifically referring to this article, the stuff they can look up. You know, like a journalist that's in Beijing during the Olympics might want to look up some sensitive stuff about Tiananmen Square, or, you know, just sensitive political stuff. They're journalists, that's what they do. And initially China decided they were going to allow it on certain computers, so they'd in places where they knew journalists were going to stay, like hotels, or, you know, I think you could even apply if you were a journalist to get a special permission. They were going to allow all information through, but this actually got messed up and made the journalists really mad. I forget exactly how it got messed up, but yeah, like right in the middle of the Olympics, all of the sort of free internet coverage that these journalists had previously had kind of got shut down instantly and created this kind of mini scandal right in the middle of the Olympics. Yeah, he talks about that, you know, like I said, with the journalists. He talks about how you can set up a remote ISBN, I think it is, which is essentially a site. And so what it is like, let's say I want to look for Tiananmen Square's Wikipedia page. I can't obviously link to that page directly in China, but what I can do is set up a remote site in Taiwan or Japan, or, you know, any other place around the globe really that doesn't have sensitive issues. When I look it up, it'll encrypt it to go to that foreign place, right? So China can't block it there. And then that foreign place will be the one that directly looks up to the site of the sensitive material. That sensitive material will be sent back to the remote site outside the country, will be encrypted and then sent to the user within China. And that sounds pretty complicated. And he said it actually slows it down, I think, from like almost instantaneous access to, half-second access in order to get this material if you have one of these kind of go-arounds for the Chinese firewall. He said it was also kind of like expensive by Chinese standards, but once again, as I said, China really doesn't care if you're willing to go to that length to get to that sensitive material. What they really want to do is, on a grand stage, on a social stage, is just to kind of discourage people from looking up that material, which the expense to some degree does. Like a lot of hotels will do it, or will get these remote access things, but individual Chinese won't, and that's obviously who China is most concerned about, is their citizens that actually, hold the vast power within their country, or at least, have the potential to. Let's see, what was the next one? China's silver lining. I think this was about the remote. There was like a very remote area of northwestern China, which is actually more like north central China. Yeah, it was about this guy Zibo, and he was Chinese, but I think during, I want to say, the Chinese Civil War in the early 1950s, fled with his family to Taiwan and became very wealthy as a internet tycoon. I mean, we're talking a few $100 million or whatever. Your classic get rich, Far East, fiber optics, rich person story. But anyway, he decided he was going to create this after visiting this extremely poor region where people essentially lived on a day-to-day diet. Decided he was going to build a resort out there to try to get people, is that right? 185. To get people to come out there and spend some more money and help the economics of the region. He essentially slated it as a kind of alpine, high elevation resort area. Now, in truth, it is high elevation, it is sparsely populated, it is alpine, though much drier than an alpine climate. But it's not Switzerland. These people are making Dutch chocolates on the side. They're barely getting enough mullet. I don't think they even grow rice in this region, enough like barley and mullet to be able to survive. And if a rain doesn't come one year, which it often doesn't because it's in a very dry region, people just starve. They just die. It's sort of like the cycle of poverty where people can't get out of it. But anyway, this guy went to the region and he really liked it. He really, his heart went out to the people, so he tried to create this region. Yeah. Try to see. Well, anyway, that was a good one. And then the last one was after the quake. Oh, no, there's two more. After the quake and their own worst enemy. After the quake was about the Sichuan earthquake that happened, I think, in May of 2008. So maybe it was even like April. But it happened a few months before the Olympics, maybe 3 or 4 months. And the huge outpouring of support, which in a society like China that, people stereotype as more authoritarian driven, as more people just get their own driven, really showed some philanthropy in this moment of desperation. Matter of fact, I think they mentioned that there was more aid that came from within China, now a lot of this being from the wealthier regions like Hong Kong, Guangdong, Shanghai, Beijing, than there was from outside China, which is amazing considering even in the wealthy areas and the wealthy individuals, overall China is much poorer than the rest of the world, not to mention that the rest of the world just has much more financing because as powerful as China is, it's the rest of the world. So yeah, that was pretty good. He kind of mentioned some of the problems people had with some of the charities, but overall how good it was. He mentioned a couple families and how they were sent out to the hinterlands, this being the Sichuan region. The Sichuan region is like, it's kind of like the Alabama of China in that, well, the Alabama with mountains, I guess. But it's like basically viewed by the rest of China as hodunk nowhere, but also with a lot of culture. And there are a ton of people out there. We're talking like 80 million people live in Sichuan. But yeah, I mean, he talked a little bit about how some people were sent out there during the Cultural Revolution and kind of contrasted the more long-term suffering they went through during the Mao Zedong era compared to the sort of immediate suffering that's caused by a natural disaster like an earthquake that they had. Yeah, it was pretty good. Talk about the middle school being built and how, some buildings survived, some didn't. The extremely fast pace of construction that went on in remote villages, which was more attuned to the large cities, but because there was this large outpouring of support, essentially what went on in terms of a fast building boom in a lot of these big cities where buildings would just pop up overnight. The same thing was happening now, not skyscrapers, but the same thing was happening in the regions affected by this natural disaster because of the money that was flowing in. Whereas in a lot of these remote regions, that just wouldn't happen. There would be, people might build a house, but it might be like a shanty house, or if something nice gets built, it doesn't get built fast like it does in the east along the coast. So that was after the quake. And then the last one was Their Own Worst Enemy, which talks about how China, while a rising superpower and having no checks either within their government, like the United States does, though conspiracy theorists can argue against that, but like Democrats, Republicans, two parties, three branches of government. That's the United States versus the communist way, which is one party, one branch of government, one way of doing things. Or the checks that they have more in Europe, which tend to be a more kind of countrywide. France checks Germany, which checks Great Britain, which checks the power to a degree of whatever Russia does, which checks the power of Spain, which checks the power of Scandinavia. China is one country. So there's kind of some other countries in the region, maybe a little bit like Japan, maybe. But for the most part, it's a monolith. There's one country, and it is China, and that is it. But what he mentions in Their Own Worst Enemy is China's check might not be territorial or ethnic, and it might not be governmental, but what it might be is just sociological. Like China can exhibit great power, but there's just limits because of the way things develop, kind of the limitations on the ground. That being like, as people get wealthier, they have more free time to a degree. Well, actually, they don't start by having more free time. They work hard. They have to work a whole lot. They start making more money, still working hard, but eventually they'll get some leisure time, and with leisure time comes more thought on the political process, and with more thought on the political process comes like political reform. So there's that control there. He talks about, I don't know, let's see what else we got in this last section. Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of kind of like how these grand scale things that China does, because they're not individuals acting as you would in a Western society where, like if I start a business and the business fails, well, that's bad for me, but it's not going to hurt the United States that much because of, I'm just one guy, I'm one business. Whereas in China, things are done sort of on an authoritarian scale, which you would think would hurt China, and it actually does, but there's just natural checks within the environment, either that being the actual environment, like pollution, or being that the demographic scale of the people, or just any number of things keep China from becoming this menace that we think it's going to be. And also one of the things that he also mentions in here is, while China is menacing in ways, and certainly its human rights are deplorable compared to what we have in the West, it's not Nazi Germany, it's not Stalin that they're just looking to, there is some benevolence there. As hard as it is to see at times, there is benevolence. So anyway, I've been ranting for a long time. I'm sure this is a 30-minute plus video, but Postcards from Tomorrow's Square, Reports from China by James Fallows. Recommend it. All right, see you guys later. Bye.